The transport hummed low beneath the platform lights. Henry shifted his canvas bag on his shoulder. His knees ached the way they always did at dusk. The boarding line moved one slow step forward. Somewhere ahead, a child was crying. Nobody turned to look. Henry had ridden the long-haul transports for 31 years, and he knew the sound of a crowd refusing to see something. It pressed against the back of his neck like a cold hand. He adjusted the strap of his bag and shuffled forward another half step. The line moved again. Ahead, the crying had stopped, and the silence that replaced it felt worse than the sound itself. He reached the doorway, and the conductor scanned his chit without looking up. The cabin lights inside were the pale blue of frozen things, and the recycled air carried the faint metal taste he had tasted on 1,000 journeys. Rows of bench seats stretched down the long aisle, most of them already filled. He moved sideways past a Veldari merchant who pulled his coat tighter. The cabin smelled of scent leather and old fear. Travelers were bunched into the middle rows, packed shoulder to shoulder, leaving the front and the back of the car oddly empty. Henry had seen this pattern before, on prison transports and refugee ships, and it always meant the same thing. Somebody on his transport was being avoided. He slowed his step and let his eyes search the rows. He saw her near the back, sitting alone on the long bench meant for four. She was small, no taller than his elbow when standing, and she sat very still with her hands folded in her lap. Her skin was a soft lavender gray, the color of bruised wildflowers. A long scar ran from her temple down across her cheek and beneath her jaw. She did not look up. The seats on either side of her were empty, and so were the seats across the aisle from her. A bubble of cold space surrounded her, and the passengers nearest that bubble kept their faces turned toward the windows. A young Tasselin woman pulled her child closer when Henry walked past. The child whispered something her mother shushed sharply. Henry kept walking. He stopped beside the empty bench. The little girl did not look up at him. He could see now that her clothes were too thin for the cabin's chill. A simple gray tunic and trousers that had been mended too many times. There was a thin metal tag clipped to her collar with a serial number stamped into it. Her fingers were laced together very tightly. Henry let his canvas bag slide off his shoulder. He set it down between his boots and lowered himself onto the bench beside her with the careful slowness of an older man's joints. The bench creaked once. The little girl flinched just slightly and did not turn her head. Henry pretended not to notice. He folded his hands on his knees, the way she had folded hers. A murmur moved through the rows ahead of them. Henry felt eyes on the back of his head, the soft pressure of strangers deciding what to think of him. Someone made a small, disgusted sound. He kept his face calm and looked straight ahead at the bulkhead. The transport's engines deepened their hum, and the platform outside the windows began to slide away into the dark. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The transport climbed up through the atmosphere with the slow patience of an old workhorse, and the cabin's lights dimmed for the long sleep cycle. Henry watched the stars sharpen outside the porthole. Beside him, the little girl did not move. He could hear her breathing, very shallow, very careful, as if she were trying not to be noticed at all. Henry opened his canvas bag and rummaged inside for a moment. He took out a small thermos of tea and unscrewed the cap, and the warm smell of honeyed leaves rose into the cold cabin air. He poured a measure into the cap and set the cap on the bench between them. He did not look at her. He simply sipped from the thermos itself and waited. The little girl's eyes moved. He saw it in the edge of his vision, the slow turn of her head, the careful study of the cup. Her hands stayed folded. Several minutes passed. The transport's engines settled into their long cruise rhythm. At last, her small fingers unwound and reached out, and she lifted the cap with both hands as if it were made of something precious. She drank in tiny sips. Henry kept his face turned toward the bulkhead and pretended to read the safety placard he had read 1,000 times. He could hear her swallowing. When she was finished, she set the cap back on the bench between them and her hands folded again. He refilled the cap without comment. She drank again, slower this time. A passenger 2 rows ahead stood up and made a show of moving to an even more distant seat. The man's boots thudded heavily down the aisle. Henry watched him pass without expression. The little girl flinched again at the sound. Henry slid the thermos a little closer to her side of the bench and kept his eyes on the placard. The man's seat stayed empty behind him. The lights dimmed further into the sleep cycle. Across the aisle, passengers wrapped themselves in their thermal blankets and turned their faces to the windows. Henry took the spare blanket from his bag, the one he always carried because the long-haul cabins never warmed properly. He unfolded it carefully and laid it across the bench beside the little girl, leaving the edge close enough that she could reach it. She watched the blanket for a long time before she touched it. Then her small fingers closed around the corner and drew it slowly across her lap. She did not pull it up to her shoulders. She seemed afraid that pulling it any farther would be taking too much. Henry leaned back against the bulkhead and closed his eyes. He listened to her breathing change, just a little, into something easier. He had been a mechanic for 42 years before he retired, and his hands still carried the small dark stains of engine oil that never quite washed out. He had repaired transports like this one in a dozen ports. He knew their sounds, their faults, their habits. He let the hum of the engine settle him towards sleep. Beside him, the little girl finally pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. He woke once in the deep middle of the cycle. The cabin was dim and quiet, and the little girl had fallen sideways against the wall in her sleep. The scar on her cheek looked very long in the pale blue light. Her brow was furrowed even in sleep, as if she were guarding against something even in her dreams. Henry shifted the blanket gently up to her chin and went back to sleep. When the morning lights came on, the cabin stirred with the slow noises of waking. Henry heard the murmurs begin again behind him. He sat up and felt a familiar ache in his lower back. The little girl was already awake and very still beside him. Her hands folded again, the blanket neatly folded and placed between them as if she were returning it. He picked it up and put it back across her lap. She looked at him then, for the first time. Her eyes were pale gold, the color of weak tea held up to a window. They were old eyes in a small face. She did not smile, she did not speak. She only looked at him for the length of a single breath, and then she looked down again at her hands. Henry nodded once, very slightly, and turned back toward the front. The food cart came down the aisle a little later. The server was a tired Yeltec woman with 3 arms and a worn apron, and she handed out the morning meal trays without ceremony. She paused at Henry's row. She looked at the little girl, and her mouth tightened. She set one tray down in front of Henry. She did not set one down in front of the girl. She kept moving. Henry watched the cart roll on for a moment. He looked down at his tray, which held a small bowl of warm grain mash, a piece of fruit, and a sealed cup of water. He picked up the spoon. Then he slid the entire tray across the bench until it rested in front of the little girl. He took the fruit and the water out of the tray and set them on his own side. The grain mash he left for her. She did not eat it first. She stared at the bowl as if she had been tricked many times before. Henry took a small bite of the fruit and chewed slowly. He looked out the porthole at the streaking stars. After what felt like a long time, he heard the soft sound of a spoon against the bowl. He did not turn. He did not want to startle her. He just kept watching the stars. A passenger near the food cart said something he could not quite hear, but the tone carried. A short laugh followed. Henry felt his shoulders square the way they used to square when he was younger and the world had pushed him too hard. He let the feeling pass. He took another bite of his fruit. Beside him, the little girl ate carefully, one small spoonful at a time until the bowl was empty. When she was done, she folded her hands again. The spoon she had laid down very precisely across the empty bowl. Henry took the tray and slid it back to his own side, and when the cart came back through to collect the empties, he handed it up before the server could pause again. The server's eyes flit to the girl and away. The cart moved on. The little girl did not flinch this time. A few hours into the daylight cycle, a man came down the aisle from the forward cabin. He wore a clean, dark uniform with a transport company insignia, and he carried a slim data tablet under his arm. His face was the careful, neutral face of someone trained to give bad news politely. He stopped at Henry's row. He looked at the little girl first, and then at Henry, and his eyebrows lifted very slightly. "Sir," he said, his voice low so the other passengers would not all hear, "we received a complaint. A few of the other travelers are uncomfortable with the seating arrangement. We have a seat available 3 rows forward on the aisle. I'd like to move you, if that's agreeable." He held the tablet out as if Henry would simply tap it and rise. Henry studied the man's face for a moment without answering. He let the silence stretch the way he used to let it stretch in his shop when a customer had tried to lie about what was wrong with their engine. The transport officer shifted his weight. The little girl beside Henry had gone very still, her hands tighter than before, her shoulders drawn small. Henry watched the man's eyes flick toward her and away. "I'm comfortable where I am," Henry said quietly. His voice was the calm gravel of a man who had spoken to engines more than to people for half his life. He did not raise it. He did not look away. The officer's mouth worked for a moment. He started to say something about company policy and stopped. He glanced again at the little girl, then back at Henry, and then he lowered the tablet. "As you wish, sir," the officer said. He turned and walked back up the aisle. The murmurs behind them rose for a moment and then fell. Henry leaned back against the bench and rested his rough hands on his knees. He could feel, beside him, the small shape of the girl breathing more easily now. He did not look at her. He looked at the porthole, at the slow procession of stars. After a long while, she spoke. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it, a whisper in a tongue he did not know, half formed in her throat. She was not speaking to him. She was speaking to her hands. He turned his head just enough to see her in the corner of his vision. Her lips were moving over and over the same small phrase. He did not interrupt. He simply listened to the shape of it. When she stopped, he reached into his canvas bag again. He took out the small notebook he carried for sketching repair diagrams and a stub of pencil worn down by many years. He opened the notebook to a blank page and drew, very slowly, a small house. 2 windows, a door, a chimney with a curl of smoke. He set the notebook between them on the bench and did not look at her, only at the porthole. She studied the drawing for a long time. Then her small finger reached out and touched the chimney smoke very gently, as if testing whether it was real. Henry felt something turn over in his chest, something that had been sleeping for a long time. He took the pencil and drew a small figure standing in the door of the little house. Then he handed the pencil to her. She did not take it at first. He laid the pencil on the open page and put his hands back on his knees. After several minutes, her small fingers closed around the pencil. She held it the wrong way for a moment, then adjusted. On the empty side of the page, she drew a single curling line and then another and another. It was a tree, he realized slowly, a tree with branches that bent down toward the ground like a willow. She handed him back the pencil. Her hand brushed his for half a second. Her skin was cool, like river stone in the early morning. He drew a small bird in the branches of her tree. She watched him do it, and something at the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. He passed the pencil back. She drew a second bird, smaller, sitting next to his. They drew like this for what might have been an hour. Henry lost track of the time. The cabin around them shifted and murmured. Passengers ate their midday meal. The food cart passed again. This time, Henry slid the entire tray to her side once more, and she ate without hesitation, and the cart moved past without comment. The notebook between them slowly filled with houses and trees and small birds. She had stopped flinching when he moved. That was the change he noticed first. When he reached for his thermos, her shoulders did not tighten. When he shifted his legs, she did not pull away. The small bubble of cold space around her had warmed just enough to hold one more person inside it. He poured her more tea. She took the cap with both hands as before, but she sipped it more slowly now, savoring. He did not ask her where she was going. He did not ask about the scar on her cheek. He did not ask about the serial number on the tag at her collar, though he had seen that kind of tag before on transport workers and on indentured laborers, and on the kind of people who were not supposed to exist on a passenger ship like this one. He let her be a child sitting beside him on a long ride. If you are still with us here in this quiet cabin between the stars, take a small breath with me. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me about a time you sat down somewhere on purpose because nobody else would. Just a sentence is enough. I read every one of them in the evenings, with a cup of tea of my own. The comments are the closest thing this channel has to a hearth. Stories like Henry's only matter because someone, somewhere, is willing to be the one who takes the seat. So leave a word for him below and for the little girl beside him, and we will return to them now as the long-haul transport carries them deeper into the dark between the worlds. The afternoon cycle gave way to a longer dim, and the cabin lights softened to the warm amber the company used to encourage rest. Most of the passengers settled. A few still spoke in low voices, and Henry heard occasional glances thrown at his row. But the open hostility had cooled into a wary indifference. He had outlasted them. The little girl beside him had laid her cheek against the bench wall and closed her eyes. He let her sleep. He took the notebook into his lap and looked at the pages they had filled together. Houses with chimneys, willow trees, two small birds always together in branch after branch. He turned a fresh page. On it, he drew, slowly, a workshop with a wide door open to a yard. He sketched a small bench beside it where a child might sit. He did not know why. He simply drew it. When he looked up, a woman was standing in the aisle beside their row. She was tasseling, like the young mother from earlier in the morning, but older, with silver bands at her wrists and a long blue shawl draped over her shoulders. She did not speak at first. She looked down at the sleeping little girl and at the notebook in Henry's lap. Her face was hard to read. Henry waited. "You are very kind to her," the tasseling woman said quietly. Her voice carried the soft lilt of an old colony accent. Henry nodded once. The woman looked at the little girl again, and then she lowered herself into the empty seat across the aisle. She folded her hands in her lap, very much the way the little girl folded hers. They sat together in silence for several minutes. Henry waited. "Do you know what she is?" the woman asked at last. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who wanted to give him a chance to reconsider, the way a careful neighbor might warn a man about a leaking pipe. Henry closed the notebook in his lap and set it aside. He looked at the woman, at her dark eyes, at the silver bands at her wrists. He took his time before he answered her. "She's a child," he said. The woman's face shifted just slightly. She nodded slowly, as if she had not expected that answer, but found she could not argue with it. She looked down at her own hands. After a moment she said, "Her people, the Vihi, they were a colony world, far out on the eastern arm. The Empire took them 3 winters ago. Most did not survive the camps." Henry did not respond right away. He looked at the little girl, at the scar that ran down her cheek, at the thin, worn tunic and the metal tag at her collar. The tasseling woman watched his face. She seemed to be measuring him for something. He thought of the boy his daughter had nearly adopted before the war, of the empty chairs at his own table. He let his breath out slowly. "That tag," he said softly. "What is it for?" The tasseling woman's mouth tightened. She glanced up the aisle as if to be sure they would not be overheard. "It is a survival registration," she said. "It marks the children who came out of the camps alive. They are being moved to assignment worlds. Most colonies do not want them. They carry the scars of what they saw, and people are afraid of that." Henry was quiet a long time. He looked at the porthole, at the dark, at the small, bright movement of distant stars. He felt the heaviness of years settle on him, and the way it sometimes did, the weight of the people he had not been able to help, the war that had taken half his town, the wife who had not lived to see him retire. He let the weight come and pass. "Where is she being assigned?" he said. The tasseling woman shook her head slightly. "The records do not say. The assignment officer will receive her at the port. From there she will be sent wherever her labor is most needed, probably to a mining colony, or a server farm, or a kitchen. They are 6 years old, most of them. They are placed where adults will not work." Her voice was very quiet. Henry's hands had tightened on his knees without his noticing. He looked down at them, the old oil stains in the creases of his palms, the thick joints of his fingers. He had repaired engines for 42 years, and he had been told all of his life that some things could not be fixed. He had usually disagreed. He looked at the sleeping little girl beside him, and then at the tasseling woman. "Is there anything," he said slowly, "that a person can do?" The tasseling woman studied him for a long time before she answered. She glanced again up the aisle. She seemed to weigh what to say. Then she leaned a little closer across the aisle, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "There is a provision," she said, "rarely used, in the resettlement code. A passenger may petition for guardianship at the destination port." Henry held very still. The tasseling woman saw his stillness and went on. "It is a long process. They will ask many questions. They will examine your home, your finances, your history. They will be unkind. They will assume the worst about your reasons. They will charge you fees you should not have to pay, and in the end they may refuse. Most do refuse when the petitioner is alone." Henry looked at the little girl. The amber light fell soft across the scar on her cheek. and the dark sweep of her lashes. She was breathing slow and deep. He had not heard her breathe that easily since he had first sat down beside her. He felt the weight of his years settle differently now, not as a burden, but as a kind of credential. A long life lived alone could become, perhaps, a long life that had room. "How would a person start?" Henry said. The tasseling woman reached inside her shawl and withdrew a small slip of paper that she had clearly carried for some time. She handed it across the aisle to him without ceremony. There was a name on it, and a station code, and an office number. "Ask for this woman at the port," she said. "Tell her Miri sent you. She will not promise anything, but she will listen." Henry took the slip of paper and folded it carefully and placed it inside the notebook. He looked at Mireille and inclined his head slowly. She inclined hers back. She rose then and adjusted her shawl across her shoulders and walked back up the aisle to her own seat without another word. Henry watched her go. He looked again at the little girl and at the slip of paper inside the notebook on his lap. The transport rode on through the long dim. Outside the porthole, the stars wheeled in their slow procession and the engines hummed their endless steady note. Henry sat very still and thought. He thought about his small house on the outskirts of the port town, with the workshop attached at the back and the empty bedroom that had been meant for grandchildren who never came. He thought about how quiet the evenings were. He thought about the savings he had set aside for an old age he was now realizing he did not entirely want, not in the shape he had imagined. He thought about the bench in the yard outside his workshop and the small kitchen where he ate alone, and the half-finished projects on his bench that nobody waited for him to complete. The little girl beside him stirred in her sleep and turned her face toward him. When she opened her eyes a little later, Henry was waiting with the thermos. He poured her a fresh cup of tea. She took it with both hands as before, but this time she looked up at him as she drank. Her pale gold eyes held his for several seconds. He nodded once. She nodded back, the smallest motion, and went on drinking. The cabin around them was settling into the long quiet of the deep cycle. He opened the notebook to the page with the workshop drawing. He turned it so she could see it. She studied the picture carefully, her finger tracing the wide door, the small bench beside it, the chimney curl of smoke. Then she looked up at him with a question in her face that did not need a language. He pointed at himself, then at the workshop. He pointed at her, then at the bench beside the door. She did not understand at first. She looked again at the drawing. Then her brow furrowed, and her small hand reached out and touched the bench she had drawn, and then she touched her own chest very gently. He nodded. She looked at him a long time. Her eyes were very bright in the amber light. She did not smile, but the corners of her mouth lifted in something that was almost wonder, almost a question. He could not promise. He knew that. The tasseling woman had been clear about how often these petitions failed. He could not let her hope for something she might not receive. He took the pencil and drew a small question mark beside the bench in the picture. He pointed at it and shrugged with the smallest motion of his shoulders. She studied the question mark. She seemed to understand. Then she nodded slowly, accepting. She drew a tree beside the bench, larger this time, with the willow branches he had seen her draw before. She added a small bird in the branches. She added another, smaller. Then she pointed at the larger bird, and then at him, and at the smaller bird, and then at herself. She held his eyes. Henry felt something tighten in his throat that he had not felt in a very long time. He took the pencil from her and drew, very carefully, a nest in the branches between the two birds. She studied the nest. After a long moment, she leaned her shoulder, just barely, against his arm. It was a fraction of a touch. It was the lightest thing in the world. Henry did not move. He let her stay. The transport hummed on through the dark, and the cabin lights were the color of late candlelight. He did not sleep that night. He kept very still so she would not wake. He felt the small, warm weight of her shoulder against his arm and watched the stars and let himself think, for the first time in years, about a future that was not simply the slow tying off of loose ends. He thought about the workshop door open in the morning sun. He thought about a small bench beside it. He let himself think. In the deep middle of the night cycle, a man passed by their row on his way to the lavatories. Henry recognized the heavy walk before he saw the face. It was the same man who had stood up earlier and moved seats to make a point. The man slowed as he came alongside Henry's row. He looked at the little girl asleep against Henry's shoulder. His mouth shifted. He kept walking. He did not come back that way. The morning cycle came at last. The cabin lights brightened slowly to a gold that mimicked sunrise. The little girl woke against Henry's arm and lifted her head, and for a moment she looked startled to find herself there. Then she remembered. She straightened carefully and folded her hands again. Henry smiled, very small, and offered her the thermos. She took it. The cabin around them began to stir into the noises of arrival. The transport began its long descent. Henry could feel the engines change their pitch, the familiar deepening hum he had repaired 1,000 times in his life. Outside the porthole, the stars gave way to atmosphere, and the deep black became a slow gray, then a tired blue. The port world below them was a tan and umber sphere, with dark seas and pale cities scattered along the coastlines. He had been here once, long ago. The Tasselin woman caught his eye from her seat ahead. She nodded to him, the small, careful nod of someone wishing him strength. He nodded back. The little girl beside him watched the world rise toward them through the porthole. She did not seem frightened. She seemed only attentive, as if she were memorizing the shape of one more place she would have to pass through. Henry took her hand. She let him. The transport touched down on the platform with a small hiss and a familiar shudder. The cabin lights brightened to full waking. Passengers began to rise, to pull bags down from the racks, to crowd into the aisle. Henry waited. He let the others file past. He held the little girl's hand and stayed seated until most of the cabin had emptied. She watched the passengers go and pressed a little closer to him. When the aisle had cleared, Henry rose carefully and lifted his canvas bag onto his shoulder. He took her hand again. They walked together down the long, empty aisle and out through the doorway. The dock smelled of hot metal and dust and the faint stink of fuel. A line of intake officers waited at the end of the platform, each holding a tablet, each calling out names and serial numbers from a list. A heavy-set officer with a tired face looked up as they approached. His eyes went to the tag at her collar, and he scanned it with a quick gesture of his tablet. The screen chimed. He read the assignment, and his mouth tightened slightly. He glanced at Henry with the practiced indifference of a man who had seen too many handovers. "Hand her over, citizen," he said. "I'll take it from here." Henry did not let go of her hand. He looked at the officer with the same calm he had given the transport official the day before. "I'd like to speak with an intake supervisor," he said. "I'm petitioning for guardianship under the resettlement code." The officer blinked once. He set the tablet down slowly. He looked at Henry as if he were trying to decide whether to laugh or to be annoyed. The little girl did not move. "That's not a real process anymore, citizen," the officer said. "It's still on the books, but nobody's used it in years. I'd advise you to release the minor and proceed to the customs hall." Henry did not move. He felt the little girl's grip tighten on his fingers, a small, fierce hold. He kept his eyes on the officer. "Then we'll be the ones who use it today," Henry said. "I'd like to speak with Miria's contact at the port." The officer's face changed at the name. He set down his tablet slowly. He looked at Henry and at the little girl and at the canvas bag on Henry's shoulder, and then up toward the upper level of the dock where the supervisor's office had a row of dim windows. He picked up the tablet again and tapped something into it. He spoke quietly into a small mic at his collar. Then he gestured for them to follow. They walked together past the long row of intake officers, past the lines of weary travelers, past the dim doors that opened onto the customs hall and the broader port. Henry kept his pace slow and steady to match the little girl's. She walked at his side without looking up. Her small lavender-gray hand was warm in his. The officer led them up a worn metal stairway to an office at the end of a quiet corridor. The woman behind the desk was small and gray-haired and had eyes that had clearly seen a long career of paperwork. The intake officer murmured something to her, set down the tablet, and left. The woman looked up at Henry and at the little girl and at the slip of paper Henry handed her. She read the name on it. Her face did not change. She gestured to two chairs across from her desk. They sat. "Miria sent you," the woman said. It was not a question. Henry nodded. The woman folded her hands on her desk in a way that reminded him of the little girl. She studied them both for a long moment. Then she pulled open a drawer and removed a thick file of paper forms and a small dark stamp and a worn pen that had clearly been used to fill in many other forms over many other years. "You understand," she said quietly, "that what you are asking will take time, many weeks, possibly months. And during that time, she will need to remain in supervised placement. You may visit, you may not take her home. You will be required to demonstrate financial stability, a clean record, and a suitable residence. There will be home inspections. There will be interviews. The intake board will look for any reason to refuse. She paused. Henry nodded slowly. I understand, he said. I have no record. I own my home. My savings are sufficient. I have a workshop attached to my house and steady contract work as a mechanic. I have a spare room. I can provide references from the Port Authority where I worked for 42 years. The woman wrote on her form as he spoke, slow, steady strokes of the pen. The little girl watched the pen move. The woman looked up at last. And why, she said carefully, are you doing this? Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who had to ask. Henry was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the little girl beside him. Her small hand was still in his. He looked back at the woman. Because nobody else would sit beside her, he said. And once you sit beside someone, you don't get up. The woman held his eyes for a long moment. Then she nodded, very slightly, the way Mira had nodded. She pressed the dark stamp onto a square of red ink and brought it down on the first page of the form with a small, firm sound. It will take time, she said again, but I will move it forward. The child will be placed at the coastal hostel during the petition period. You may visit her on weekends. Begin tomorrow. Henry nodded. He looked at the little girl. He did not know how to explain to her what had just happened, or what would happen next, or how long the in-between would be. He squeezed her hand once. She looked up at him with her pale gold eyes. She did not smile, but the corners of her mouth lifted again in that small, almost question, almost wonder. He nodded. She seemed to understand. The woman wrote a placement slip and handed it to a young clerk who had appeared silently at the door. The clerk took the little girl's other hand with the practiced gentleness of someone who had escorted many children through this office. The little girl looked at Henry. He knelt down slowly, the way his old knees would allow, until his face was level with hers. He took both her hands in his. He did not say anything. He did not have any words she would understand. He drew with his finger a small house in the air between them and a willow tree and two birds. She watched his hand move. She nodded slowly. He stood up again, his knees creaking. The clerk led her away down the long hallway. She looked back once at the door. Henry lifted his hand. She lifted hers in return. He walked back through the port alone. The customs hall was full of bright signs and impatient travelers, and nobody noticed an old human mechanic with a canvas bag on his shoulder. He passed through the gates and out into the dust of the port town. The sun was setting over the western flats. He walked the familiar road home with his bag heavy on his shoulder and a kind of light in his chest he had not carried in many years. His house stood at the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to the gravel track. The workshop door was closed. The bench beside it was empty. He set his bag down on the porch and stood looking at the small house for a long while. Then he turned and walked back to the workshop and opened the wide door. The smell of oil and metal greeted him like an old friend. He began, quietly, to clean. He worked through the evening. He swept the floor of the workshop. He cleared the half-finished projects from the long bench and stacked them neatly along the wall. He repaired the wobble in the small bench outside the door. He aired out the spare bedroom. He washed the windows. He pulled the dust covers off the small chair in the kitchen that had not been sat in for many years. He set a place at the table. In the morning, he caught the first transport east to the coastal hostel. He brought the notebook with him. He sat with the little girl on a small porch overlooking the gray sea, and they drew together for 2 hours. He brought her a thermos of honeyed tea. She drank from the cap with both hands. When he left, she walked him to the gate. She did not cry. She watched him go down the road. The weeks were long. The intake board asked their questions, and he answered each one with the slow patience he had used on 1,000 misfiring engines. They inspected his home. They examined his savings. They interviewed the neighbors. The neighbors, to his surprise, spoke well of him. Old Mrs. Zard, Anders from down the road, said he had repaired her water pump every spring for 20 years and never charged for the parts. Every weekend he traveled to the coast. Every weekend the little girl met him at the gate. Slowly, in small, careful pieces, she began to speak. Her words came in a soft language he did not know, but she was patient with him, as he was patient with him, as he was patient with her. She pointed at things. She named them. He repeated. He pointed. He named. They were each other's first students, the notebook filled with 2 languages now. He learned that her name was Eili. She said it the first time at the end of the 3rd weekend, while they were eating bread together on the porch. She tapped her own chest and said the word very quietly and waited. Henry repeated it back to her carefully. She nodded. Then she tapped his chest and waited. He said his name. She repeated it. They tried each other's names back and forth until they laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. It was a small sound, careful, as if she were testing whether laughter was still allowed in the world. He laughed too, the dry, rusty laugh of a man who had not laughed in years. The hostel staff looked out the window at the 2 of them and shook their heads slowly. The clerk who had first taken her hand was watching from the doorway. She was smiling. The petition was approved on the 7th weekend. The gray-haired woman at the port called him into her office and handed him the final stamped papers without ceremony. "It is done," she said. "You may take her home." Henry held the papers carefully. He looked at the dark stamp at the bottom of the last page, and the signatures, and the small printed seal of the Port Authority. He nodded. He did not trust his voice. He went to the coastal hostel that afternoon. Eili was waiting at the gate as she always was. He knelt down slowly and showed her the papers. She did not understand the words, but she saw the seals and she saw his face. She looked up at him, and her pale gold eyes were very bright. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked together back down the road to the transport platform. The ride home was not long. The transport was a local one, small and slow, with windows that opened to let in the dust-warm air of the flats. Eili sat next to him on the bench seat and watched the world pass. She did not speak. She held his hand. He pointed out the things they passed and named them in his own tongue, and she repeated each word carefully, the shape of it forming slowly in her small mouth. The house came into view at the end of the gravel track. The workshop door was open in the late sun. The small bench beside it was waiting. Eili stopped walking when she saw it. She looked up at Henry. He nodded. She walked the last stretch slowly, and when she reached the bench, she touched it with her small hand as if she had drawn it many weeks ago and was checking that it was real. He opened the door of the house for her. She walked in carefully. She studied the kitchen, the table set for 2, the small chair by the window. She studied the hallway and the door at the end of it. He led her to the spare bedroom. It was simple, with a narrow bed and a wooden chest and a window that looked out over the workshop yard. She stood in the doorway for a long time. She turned to him. She held up her hands, palms together, and inclined her head slowly. He did not know what the gesture meant in her language, but he understood it in any. He laid his rough hand on the top of her small head. Very gently, she closed her eyes. They stood like that for several breaths in the doorway of the small bedroom. Outside, the western sun was sinking into the dust-gold flats. The first night, she fell asleep before the table was cleared. He carried her to her bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin and stood watching her for a moment in the doorway. The scar on her cheek looked very long in the lamplight, but it no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a road she had walked and survived. He turned off the lamp. He closed her door very softly behind him. The years that followed were quiet ones. Eili grew. She learned his language and taught him hers. She helped in the workshop, her small hands surprisingly clever with the tiny parts. She planted a willow sapling in the yard beside the workshop bench, and over the years it grew tall and bent its branches down toward the ground like the tree she had drawn on the transport. 2 small birds nested in it the 3rd spring. Old Mrs. Anders stopped bringing her water pump in for repair because Eili began to fix it herself when she was 12. The other townspeople who had stared at first came slowly to know her. The tasselin merchant who had pulled his coat tighter on the transport years ago, it turned out, lived only a few stations away, and his daughter became Eili's friend. The bubble of cold space around her had warmed entirely now. When Eili was 16, she asked Henry one evening at the table why he had taken the seat. He had been waiting for that question for 10 years. He set down his spoon and looked at her across the table, at the young woman she had become, at the small scar on her cheek that had faded to a pale silver line. He thought for a long time before he answered. The willow outside the window moved softly. "Because the seat was empty," he said at last, "and you are already in the one next to it." She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way she had nodded the very first night, in the office, when she had not understood the words but had understood the meaning. She reached across the table and laid her small, lavender-gray hand on his old, oil-stained one. Outside, the willow bent in the wind. "If you have stayed with us all the way to this small kitchen at the edge of the flats, thank you. If Henry and Eileen story warmed something quiet in you tonight, a small tap on the like button helps stories like this one find their way to other tired travelers who need a hearth, travelers who need a hearth, travelers. It costs you nothing, and it means a great deal to the work of telling them well. If you would like more long, quiet stories like this one, the subscribe button and the small bell beside it will bring them to you when they are ready. We are a slow channel by design, telling careful tales of kindness in a cruel galaxy, and we are glad of every traveler who chooses to sit a while at this fire with us. Welcome, if you are new. Welcome back, if you are not. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me which moment in Henry and Eileen's long journey stayed with you most. Was it the cup of tea on the bench, the drawing of the willow tree, the moment he said her name was a child, or the empty seat beside the workshop bench that was waiting for her all along? I read every comment in the evenings. Next time at the Hearth, we will tell the story of a lighthouse keeper on a forgotten sea planet who finds a wounded alien washed up on his shore in the long winter, and what comes for them both when the spring tides rise. It will be a quiet one, like this one, and a long one, and I hope you will join us by the fire when it is ready. Until then, thank you for sitting with us tonight, traveler. Thank you for taking the seat. Somewhere, on some long transport between the worlds, a small scarred child is folding her hands in her lap and waiting to see who will choose to sit beside her. May it be you. May it be all of us. The hearth will be warm again next time. Walk gently until then, and good night.